thinking about writing, during our English, our language arts block, it's not the only time during a day where students can write, where you can gather evidence, not only in terms of the language that's being used, but also how are students explaining. So in math, there's opportunities for students to have some written explanations. So here's a word problem that I pose to my students. And before I continue, you might see that I have a couple of number choices. So one of the things that I do for my students to help differentiate and make sure that all students' needs are being met. Again, I have first and second grade students, so I need to make sure that it's the math is approachable in order for me to be able to assess the language. So there's different number sets, and they're placed in any random order. It's not from the easiest to the hardest, so students get to see the numbers and determine what number sets would be just right for them. And it takes some teaching too, but eventually students begin to see what number sets really work for them. Is it 2-digit numbers? Will it be 3-digit numbers? 3-digit numbers beyond 500? So in this particular word problem, so there are 250 adults, 60 girls, and 30 boys on a train. How many more adults are there than children? So again, the words boys and girls were not reiterated, it was more children. So when working with English language learners, think about even problems that you're posing for them and how might they interpret. So you're getting an understanding of what they're understanding based on this problem and then having them to explain. So for this particular word problem, students had an opportunity to solve the problem using any particular strategy. And one thing that I had them do after they came up with their strategy, which we can't see here, but they then had to explain. They had to explain their strategy step by step in terms of how they solved it. And one of the things that I mentioned to my students, and over the course of the year they tend to get better at, is if I were to take your work home today, if I were to take everyone's math journal, I should be able to understand more or less your strategy. And some strategies, I have to say, are complex. And so I tell them, it's really hard for me to open your journal and yes, your strategy looks incredible. I just don't know where you started. So this is an opportunity for you to walk me through your strategy so I can learn what you did and in what order. So students began to get really excited about it. So one student once told me, oh, so what you want to do is be able to tap into my brain. And I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. I said, and I can't take you home, can I? They're like, oh, no. So this is a way for them to explain step by step in terms of how they solve the strategy. Now, this particular student started with first I joined 247 and 184 to see how many children there were, and there were 431. So we know more or less the thinking behind what the child was already thinking at the beginning, and then the sequential order. So it begins with first, then, after, next, finally. Now, yes, it gives a sequence to how students probably solve the problem. One thing that I've noticed working with my English language learners is that, yes, we can have all these words up for them to use. Sometimes they use them, sometimes not, and sometimes what we see over and over is the and, this is what I did. So I do have certain charts available for students to see some of these transitional signaling words that they can use to explain their work. What I tend to do after a couple of days into the school year, or that we've been working on this, is that I tend to remove some of those supports for some students. Or I don't make them as accessible to all, like for the entire class, but I might just put them into certain students' math journals and have them have a copy. And it's usually for those students who still need that support. But for other students, I don't want it to become a crutch. I want them to be able to do this independently, a lot more organic, a lot more fluid in their conversations or in their written work. So it's knowing when to support them and give them all the supports that they need and when to gradually start replacing them. So one thing I also do, as you can see here, is that we use Post-its, and every Post-it, as you can see here, is a different color. For some students, just having that visual of color becomes important too. And for some students, it's actually, okay, we're not going to write it today because it might be that that particular student is not ready to write such detailed explanation about how they solved today's problem, but it might be walk me through how you solved today's problem. So as they're, walking me through their strategy, what I'm doing is just putting my hand over each Post-it and it's like, okay, and then what did you do? Suddenly what happened? So I'm the one sort of throwing the words out there, but yet moving my hand so students can see, okay, more or less the breakdown. So when they have to do it independently, once they're ready, they have at least some idea as to what they might be able to do. Another written explanation or opportunities I give my students to explain their work is that sometimes they have to explain their strategy, and sometimes they have to give more than just an explanation. So for this particular problem, one student's response was, whenever I try solving a word problem, it helps me to draw a picture to better understand the problem. Since a cylinder has two round faces and no square faces, then it could not be the answer. So although didn't give an explanation as to what could be the answer, there is an explanation as what can't be the answer. So earlier, I also explained to a group that there might be mistakes in the content. There might be mistakes in the answer that students give, but it's not a time to correct the mistake, but it's allowing them, if my job or I'm asking them to explain their work, then whether it's right or wrong, I'm asking for the explanation. So in making sure, in addressing that with my students and having it be the goal for the day for math, if it's the explanation, then I really have to hold myself accountable for just assessing the explanation portion of it. And teaching to that, there's a lot we can teach our students when we conference with them, or even looking at a written sample or having them explain, but it's really being intentional as to what we're looking for and what we're asking them to do. And so again, in this case, it wasn't explaining what can be the answer, it's what cannot, but there's, even in this example, there's some evidence, there's bits of information that I can take and still learn something from this child. Okay, wow, the use of since. Then, explaining why it wouldn't be the answer. So what language is this child using that's valuable to me and understanding their language needs?